On March 29th of this year, we started the First Look series where we started a process of looking at all 138 teams for each FBS program that makes up our beautiful sport and give a holistic look at all of those teams. And today we are getting into one of the last teams to be revealed, which is that number 2 ranked team in the country. The next video that you see from this series is going to be for the number 1 ranked team in all of college football. And this team is not going to be the number 1 team, but they were really close to getting there. The Oregon Ducks, who have been really close to reaching the mountaintop in our sport, making some decent runs, making the college football playoff over the last couple of years, but they haven't made it to the mountaintop yet. Is this the years that they get it done, especially with some huge additions to this team, as well as some unexpected returnees as well? It's going to be a fun one to talk about Oregon football here in this video. And if you guys are excited for it as well, make sure you go ahead, hit that like button, as well as hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel. And first and foremost, let me just say this about this Oregon football program. This is one of the best programs in all of college football. I have them as a top 5 program in the country. I only think that, in fact, they are not number 5 or number 4 from a pure organizational standpoint. I think they're closer to that top 3 organizationally. And if we are talking about teams that have a coach that haven't won a national championship yet, but are capable of making such an achievement happen, I mean, Dan Lanning is certainly in that list of premier candidates to win that national championship in this first year out. And it definitely helps that originally the plan was you're probably going to either have to look internally or get somebody in from the transfer portal, which is what they did a couple of years ago when they brought back Dante Moore. But it turns out that instead of being that top 5 NFL pick where he would have likely went to the New York Jets, in my opinion, Dante Moore ends up staying. And it was a huge surprise at the time, even with the NIL and with the transfer portal that's in place. Normally when you see a top 5 prospect, those type of guys don't decide to stay for an extra year. So that was huge for Oregon from the get-go. And what that does is it gives them more time to establish the next lineage at that quarterback position. And that's exactly what they did here with Dylan Raiola, who entered the transfer portal. He started a couple of years at Nebraska. And so Dylan Raiola, no pressure for him to play right away. He might get some spot duties if there's a blowout. Might be a 30-30 guy that I like to call, but it's an opportunity for him to learn. And it's so nice to know that if Dante Moore does end up getting hurt, you have someone that started multiple years in the Big Ten. So, I mean, probably not intentionally, but Dylan Raiola is going to be the best backup quarterback in the Big Ten. And I don't know if it's particularly close, to be honest with you, but what is going to truly be scary about this football team is that I think the supporting cast around this quarterback is going to be better than last year, at least on the offensive side of the ball. This was one of the younger teams in the country, and yet they still managed to make the playoff last year. So that's one reason why I'm really high on this football team. For example, I think this offensive line, this is going to be a really good offensive line this upcoming season. I really like the fact that they do have 2 offensive linemen that were Big Ten nominees, like for those all Big Ten conference teams from last year. They come back. Apani Laulu and Dave Louie are both back on this team. And I think that a guy like an Emmanuel Arako, a 5-star recruit in the 2026 high school recruit class. And listen, I'm going to apologize in advance if I mess up some of these names. I apologize. If you want to hit me up with the pronunciation, feel free to do so in the comment section. But he's a really good football player, man. 5-star recruit. That's someone that could potentially play right away and be a meaningful contributor on that offense. An offense that I think is going to be really good coming into this season. And I think it helps as well that I think that this wide receiver group, I think is going to be an improved wide receiver group too. I mean, they didn't necessarily, they didn't lose any wide receivers to the NFL draft. They lose Kenyon Sadiq, and that stinks. But, if guys like Keontae Harrison and Tredarian Ball coming in, and maybe they're not as talented from a high-end perspective, but they could be a little bit deeper in terms of viable players that they could play at tight end. So maybe not a game breaker that they have at the tight end position, but you have multiple options that I think that they can employ, like those two guys that I mentioned that are going to be true freshmen. They're really good, talented guys, high 4-star recruits. Those are guys that can step in and play for you right away, potentially, at least in some kind of contributor role, right? But wide receiver, though, I think this wide receiver group has genuinely been upgraded from this past season. And, like I mentioned before, they did not lose anybody of note, like in the wide receiver room, but they had a couple of nice receivers. One from the high school ranks in Jalen Lott, who, again, is another one of those high 4-star recruits in this 2026 high school recruiting class. So Jalen Lott could step in and be a solid contributor. Plus, Iverson Hooks comes in, and listen, he's a UAP transfer, so maybe he was a byproduct of, listen, that defense was a complete disaster, man. I completely get it. So they were throwing the ball a lot, but Iverson Hooks, you could say maybe benefited from the fact that he was in an offense that maybe gave him a lot of opportunities. But I mean, putting up over 900 yards receiving in what is a really good group of six conference, that's not nothing, right? So Iverson Hooks, I'm very fascinated to see what his role is on the Oregon offense and what kind of production that he can put up this upcoming season, given that there's not as much pressure for them to put up 40 points. They could put up 25, 30 points and still be okay for incident and still win comfortably. So that is something that I am fascinated about this wide receiver room. Uh, Really the biggest question I have about this roster, and it's really nitpicky because of the fact that, listen, we are in the top five. We're talking about differentiating between what's the best team in the country, what's the second best team in the country. It is that running back room a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you, because of the fact they do lose their top running back, Noah Whittingham, to the NFL. I understand that they were four deep last year, so it might not be like a non-issue because they were playing four different running backs that were all contributing. It wasn't just Noah Whittington. But yeah, that is the one nitpick that I do have about this team, if anything, is like who's going to step up and be that alpha dog in the running back room. I think that's really the biggest question. But I mean, with how good this offensive line is going to be, you could have a running back room by committee. You might not have that alpha dog that could take over a game for you and still be perfectly fine. I mean, just it would be nice to have a really spectacular stud to pair next to either Dylan Raiola if he happens to be in the game because of injury, or Dante Moore, who you're expecting to see most of the time. But it's I'm sure they're going to be fine at the running back position is what I'm trying to say. Now, defensively, and defensively they were held back a little bit, in the two games that they lost to Indiana. They struggled to stop those elite offenses when Oregon did go up against them. And that was another reason why I didn't have them as a number one team in the country, is because I look at this team and I still think that this is going to be a good defense, and maybe even a very good defense. I don't know if they take that next step though into becoming an elite defense is really what I'm trying to say here, right? And it doesn't help that they essentially lost their entire defensive line to the transfer portal. Tiana Gray goes to Notre Dame. Terrence Green goes to Alabama. Blake Purchase goes to Ole Miss. I mean, those are all really good football players that you did end up losing last year in the transfer portal. Now, they have plenty of defensive talent that they can still call upon. Bear Alexander, for example, is still back. He's a second team All Big Ten nominee. Amari Washington is also going to be back as well, and he was a third team All Big Ten player. They also brought in an Anthony Jones from the high school ranks, who was a 5-star recruit, and I expect him to have opportunities to play early, and if he plays well, not just early, but play often as well. Anthony Jones is a special football player. He got those 5 stars by his name for a reason. I guess it's going to be a little bit TBD just in terms of if this defensive line is able to maintain the level of play from last season in spite of losing all of that talent in the transfer portal. It's really going to depend on. I think Anthony Jones might be the wild card here, is what I'm trying to say. And you kind of feel that the whole defense as a whole is kind of a wild card, because like I don't think they got worse, but again, I just don't know if they got better unless guys that are already on this team last year they end up taking leaps. But we're looking at teams from a baseline perspective, right? Because for the linebacker position, for example, Tatum Tuwalde, well, really good linebacker, but he's not going to have his fellow teammate in Bryce Bozier right next to him who heads on off to the NFL draft. So, you still have really good linebacker play, but is there a step back there because the person that slots in for a Bryce Bozier is not the same kind of player that maybe he was last year. And it's kind of the same thing about the secondary too, because you do keep Brandon Finney Jr., who was one of the best corners in the Big Ten, a second team all conference nominee. You do also bring in Jet Washington, another 5-star recruit that I think is going to play right away, could compete to be the backfield running mate, like out there in the defensive secondary for Coy Parrish, who you end up transferring into Minnesota. And Coy Parrish is really interesting to me. He's kind of a kind of like a great brand value version of Travis Hunter a couple of years ago. He can play both sides of the ball really well. Just wasn't fully utilized at Minnesota necessarily. So I'm curious to see how Coy Paris is used, what kind of offensive packages um they kind of use, like to get him more involved in the offense, if that is such a thing, or if he just, no kidding, like just focus on being a really good secondary guy, or like maybe make that leap to possibly being elite, because it was a little bit of a step back from last year. But either way, you're replacing multiple NFL caliber defensive backs. Like Dylan Feynman heads off to the NFL, and he was a first round caliber safety. Jaden Kennedy was a really nice corner for them as well, and he's gone. I also don't want to overlook Kingston Lopa, who ends up transferring to Cal. He's no longer here either. So really, like, I don't think the defense is going to be a liability, but I don't know if the defense takes this leap forward. That I don't think that should be an expectation, but do think the offense does end up certainly getting even better. And so it could always be a possibility that, hey, offense is able to dictate the pace of the games, and the defense can be a little bit more optimistic as a result of that. So that's what I'm looking at for Oregon from a holistic roster standpoint. But now let's go ahead and get into, what does the schedule look like for the Oregon Ducks realistically, right? So this is Oregon's schedule. And I will say this about the Oregon Ducks. I think they have one of the highest floors in the entirety of the Big Ten. I think only one other team that we revealed earlier in this series has the same kind of floor. Like even the number one team in the country that's in my rankings, they're not going to have a 9-3 floor. Just a little bit of a spoiler here. But how this season goes, I think it really barrels down to 3 games. Whether they get back to the Big Ten championship game because they narrowly missed out last season. They did win it in 2024, as well as whether they get back to the college football playoff or not. I think they have to win at least one of these 3 games that are considered toss-ups in order for them to go. Because as we've seen, 9-3, it gets really, really questionable because even at 9-3, like you're really hoping for a lot of chaos to happen around the country in order to get in as an at-large. And maybe they get helped out by the fact that they have a top 10 strength of schedule. They have the second toughest schedule in the Big Ten. Part of that is, they play some quality non-conference opponents, Boise State and Oklahoma State, but I mean, there's levels to it. I wouldn't say they're elite teams, but no kidding. I think those toss-up games are going to be at USC. You're going on the road to play against those guys. And listen, Lincoln Riley, he could be a year away from being an elite football team. What if they're a year early? I mean, Jaden Mayava, maybe not on the same level as Dante Moore, but Jaden Mayava can play. And they definitely have a lot of really talented players that are also young guys too, kind of similar to where Oregon was at last year. They were one of the youngest teams in the Big Ten. Dan Lanning said that didn't matter, and they were still able to parlay that into an 11-win season anyways, but that is something to seriously consider. And then the two other games that they have in this second half, the start of second half of the season, this might be their toughest stretch. They kind of go back and forth. You got two cross country road trips in the span of three games. You go play Illinois, and I understand that Illinois is not going to be the same football team that we've been accustomed to seeing the last couple of years. I think they take that step back, but you still have to travel across the country to play them. And even though Brett Bielema couldn't get them to a college football playoff spot, I mean they were still able to knock off USC in their home building. So like, it's still a well-coached football team. You got to make a cross-country road trip. So that is not going to be a layup of a game by any stretch of the imagination, even though you should have more talent. And then, of course, you also have the Ohio State game on the road. And that game in particular absolutely can determine whether Oregon goes to the Big Ten championship or not. Because normally, when, as we've seen, and really in a lot of the time that I've been alive, is that or like the Big Ten tends to run through Ohio State. So if you want to be the Big Ten champs, you're at some point more likely than not going to have to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes, and you're going to have to do it in Columbus. And they have a lot of really talented dudes. So if you want to make it to the Big Ten championship and be a Big Ten champion, it's going to have to evolve Ohio State. Indiana did this last year. Can Oregon do the same thing? We'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, I think this is a really good year for the Oregon Ducks. Obviously, I would be a little surprised if they were 9-3, to be honest with you. But it is possible. I think more realistically, this is an 11-1 team. They'll be either in the Big Ten championship or they'll be on the verge of making it. And obviously, I think they're going to be a college football playoff team. And, from there, like anything goes. If they're playing really good football at the right time, then, Oregon can't be written off, especially because Dante Moore is back and he was going to be a top 5 pick if he went in the NFL draft this year. So that's my thoughts on the Oregon football team. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, though. Is number 2 too high, or is number 2 a little bit too low for you? Let me know in the comments down below what you think about this Oregon football team. And if you've been enjoying this entire series, first of all, thank you. We've been doing this since mid to late March, at least from a preparation standpoint. So being able to deliver this series to you guys and seeing all the enjoyment you have, like, we've been killing it in the YouTube analytics lately. Like, I've genuinely appreciated it, man. Next time out, we reveal the number 1 team. I hope to see you guys there. But for now, it's Jake from College Football Red Zone signing off. Hoping you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.